Welcome back to the deep dive. We are really excited to have you here with us today because, well, we are tackling a topic that affects a massive portion of the population.
Yeah, the statistics are honestly pretty staggering.
Right. Worldwide, osteoporosis affects 1 in 3 women over the age of 50, and that is largely driven by the sudden drop in estrogen during menopause.
Exactly. And for decades, the prevailing medical advice for you to protect these fragile aging bones was basically just light, gentle exercise.
Stick to the 2-pound pink dumbbells, right? Avoid anything too strenuous. But today's stack of sources, which includes global consensus statements, scoping reviews on menopause, and some incredibly dense biomechanical research papers, they reveal a biological mechanism that proves almost the exact opposite.
Yeah, it completely flips the old advice on its head.
It really does. So the mission for today's deep dive is to explore the fascinating science of exactly how resistance and weight-bearing training physically protects against menopausal bone loss, and we are going right down to the cellular level.
Because that's where the magic really happens. Seeing how the physical weight of a barbell translates into a chemical signal.
A signal that literally forces your body to build new bone. Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the underlying biology of bone remodeling, right? So we can understand why menopause accelerates bone loss in the first place.
Right, because bone isn't just dead scaffolding. It's a highly dynamic, living tissue that is in a constant state of remodeling throughout your entire life. And this process is driven by two main cellular players.
The builders and the demolition crew.
Basically, yeah. So you have your osteoblasts, which are the bone-forming cells. They lay down new mineral matrix. And then you have the osteoclasts, which are the bone-resorbing cells that dissolve and clear out the old micro-damaged bone.
And estrogen is essentially the project manager keeping both of these crews in perfect equilibrium, right?
Exactly. Estrogen is crucial here. It promotes something called apoptosis in the osteoclasts.
Apoptosis, so programmed cell death.
Yeah, it essentially forces the bone-eating cells to die off on a strict schedule, and it also reduces the recruitment of new ones from the bone marrow. So under normal circumstances, with plenty of estrogen, everything is perfectly balanced.
But then perimenopause and menopause happen, and they completely upend that equilibrium. When your estrogen levels take that dramatic drop, those biological breaks they're just taken completely off the osteoclasts.
The shift is immediate. Without estrogen dictating their lifespan, the osteoclasts live longer, their numbers swell, and their bone-resorbing activity rapidly outpaces the bone-forming activity of the builders.
Wow.
Yeah, so you get this progressive decline in bone mineral density. And if a standard DXA scan shows a T-score of less than -2.5, well, that's the clinical threshold for osteoporosis.
So it's like a construction site where the demolition crew starts working double shifts and the builders just take a coffee break. The building is coming down way faster than it's going up.
That's a really great way to visualize it.
Yeah. But I have to push back here for a second. If the demolition crew is running completely wild, specifically because of low estrogen, how on earth does picking up a heavy dumbbell stop them? Hormones and heavy weights seem like they operate in two completely different biological languages.
That is the big question, right?
Yeah.
And to resolve that disconnect, we actually have to look at the true mastermind of the skeleton.
Wait, so not the builders or the demolition crew?
No, actually. Even though they get all the attention, they make up a tiny fraction of your bone cells. Over 90% of the cells in your bones are actually osteocytes.
Okay.
And unlike the other cells that work on the surface, these osteocytes are buried deep inside the hard, calcified bone matrix itself. They're these star-shaped cells with long, slender, tentacle-like extensions.
Like a massive interconnected network. Here's where it gets really interesting because those osteocytes are essentially translators.
Exactly. They're professional mechanosensors. They translate the physical weight into chemical signals.
But the mechanics of that are wild. Because when you lift a heavy weight, or even when you just jump, your bone isn't perfectly rigid, right? It actually bends slightly.
Yes, it deforms. We call those tiny bends microstrains. So picture the environment these osteocytes are trapped in. Your bone is full of these microscopic fluid-filled tunnels called canaliculi.
Right.
And the chemical extensions of the osteocytes sit inside these fluid-filled tunnels.
Mm-hmm.
So when you load the bone with a heavy squat, the bone slightly bends. It compresses the bone matrix.
And that physically squeezes a thin layer of interstitial fluid right through those tiny canals rushing over the osteocytes. We call this fluid shear stress.
Yes, fluid shear stress.
It's basically like standing in a really narrow rock canyon, right? And feeling this massive sudden rush of wind when a boulder falls at the canyon entrance and displaces all the air.
The canyon analogy is spot on. What's fascinating here is that this fluid flow basically acts as a mechanical amplifier. The actual bending of the bone is tiny, but forcing that fluid through such microscopic tunnels creates massive shear stress on the cell.
And sitting right on the surface of that cell is the key to everything, the piezo 1 channel.
Yep, the biological switch. It's a mechanosensitive ion channel. So it's physically pulled open by the friction and force of that rushing fluid.
And the sources emphasize just how vital this is, like that dense biomechanical paper from the journal eLife. They noted that when they actually deleted the piezo 1 gene in mice, the mice lost huge amounts of bone mass and strength.
Because without that specific channel, the osteocytes literally couldn't feel the mechanical load anymore. The skeleton became totally deaf to the physical weight of the mouse moving around.
Wow, so if the cell can't feel the squeeze, the bone-building process never even starts.
Exactly.
But, okay, once that piezo 1 channel gets yanked open by the rushing fluid, what happens next? The cell doesn't just sit there. I know the sources mentioned it releases nitric oxide, or NO, immediately.
Right, the NO acts like a rapid SOS signal. It tells the surrounding cellular network that a massive physical stress event is happening. But that's just the alarm bell. The real magic happens with the genetic cascade that follows.
The what beta-catenin signaling pathway.
Yes, when piezo-1 opens, it triggers this pathway, which stops the degradation of a protein called beta-catenin inside the cell. So this beta-catenin builds up and eventually travels right into the nucleus of the cell.
Where the DNA is stored.
Exactly. And once it's in the nucleus, it binds to transcription factors and physically turns on the genes responsible for bone formation.
So it turns the squeeze into actual bone.
Right.
What does that chemical cascade look like as an output on our cellular construction site?
Two crucial things happen.
Yeah.
First, those chemical signals travel to the surface of the bone and actively suppress the recruitment of the osteoclast demolition crew. So it puts the brakes back on.
Okay, that stops the estrogen-deficient bone loss.
Right. And second, it heavily stimulates the osteoblast builders. It tells them to multiply and start laying down new, dense mineral matrix exactly where the bone experienced the mechanical stress.
It's so smart. But, there was another detail in the sources about how these cells sense force that kind of blew my mind. It wasn't just about fluid shear stress from heavy lifting, but also about high-frequency vibrations from impact.
Ah, yes, the bobblehead effect.
Right, because the nucleus of the osteocyte where the DNA sits is actually denser and heavier than the rest of the cell, so when you jump, that high-frequency impact causes the heavier nucleus to actually vibrate inside the cell.
Yeah, it vibrates out of sync with the cytoplasm. It's called nuclear displacement by momentum transfer. The nucleus is tethered to the cell's membrane by the cytoskeleton. So when the heavy nucleus bobbles from an impact, it yanks on those internal tethers.
Which creates another mechanical trigger that turns on those exact same bone-building genes.
Yep. It's a completely different mechanism than the rushing fluid, but the exact same incredible outcome.
But wait, if heavy loading and impact are basically the only ways to trigger piezo 1 and yank on the cytoskeleton, doesn't that completely invalidate the old medical advice? I mean, telling postmenopausal women to stick to gentle walking and pink dumbbells.
Oh, completely. Because if the bone doesn't bend, the fluid doesn't rush, and the cell never gets the signal to build, period.
And that leads perfectly to that game-changing study from our sources, the Lift More trial. Did those researchers essentially set out to prove that light weights are a waste of time for bone density?
Basically, yes. They were challenging a really deep-seated fear in the medical community. The old assumption was that prescribing heavy deadlifts to a woman with low bone mass was just, well, a recipe for a fractured spine.
The fear of injury totally outweighed the biological reality of what the cells actually need.
Exactly. But the Lift More trial, which stands for Lifting Intervention for Training Muscle and Osteoporosis Rehabilitation, it revolutionized the field.
They took postmenopausal women with low bone mass, including women with full-blown osteoporosis, and put them on a strict, supervised program of high-intensity resistance training. Heavy squats, deadlifts, working at 70 to 85% of their one-rep max.
Which is powerlifting territory.
Right. And what happened?
Well, the trial proved two things. First, when supervised with good form, lifting heavy is incredibly safe, even for these women. Second, it was highly effective. The women saw significant structural improvements in bone mineral density in their lumbar spine and femoral neck.
Which is huge because hip fractures at the femoral neck are a leading cause of severe mobility loss as we age. By lifting heavy, they finally gave the osteocytes a loud enough signal to trigger the builders.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the global consensus statements draw a very clear line in the sand now. The optimal routine is high-intensity resistance training 2 to 3 days a week for at least 6 months.
Because remodeling is a slow process.
Right. And you combine that heavy lifting with impact activities like jumping or brisk jogging
Yeah.
to provide that rapid mechanical stimulus for the nuclear bottlehead effect.
Okay, I get that heavy weights build bone, but let me challenge this exercise paradigm for a second based on some of our other sources.
Okay, go for it.
We started by saying the root cause of this massive bone loss is the drop in estrogen. And the scoping reviews point out that menopause hormone therapy, or MHT, drastically lowers fracture risk by replacing that estrogen.
It's true.
So if someone is already taking HRT to put the brakes on the demolition crew, why do they still need to do heavy squats? Isn't the hormone therapy enough to protect their skeleton?
That is a really vital question. So MHT provides estrogen, which reinstates osteoclast apoptosis. It stops the demolition crew and slows down the bone resorption. But, and this is key, stopping the loss is not the same as driving new growth.
It stops the bleeding, but it doesn't close the wound.
Exactly. MHT doesn't aggressively stimulate the builders to lay down massive amounts of new bone. To close the wound, you need mechanical loading. The sources show that combining MHT and heavy exercise is the single most effective strategy for enhancing bone mineral density.
You're manipulating both sides of the equation. MHT puts on the brakes, exercise steps on the gas, and honestly, there was this staggering stat from a meta-analysis by Gracing and colleagues looking at 10,000 postmenopausal women.
Oh, the muscle strength data.
Yeah. They found that postmenopausal women on hormone replacement therapy had a 5% greater muscle strength than those who weren't. It really shows how hormones and physical loading support both the muscle and the skeleton.
Well, the musculoskeletal system is entirely integrated. Estrogen receptors are abundant in muscle tissue too. So MHT mitigates the loss of muscle mass, and then lifting heavy builds those muscle fibers up even more.
And stronger muscles pull harder on the bones, creating even more localized mechanical stress. It's an amazing synergy.
It really is.
Now, we do need to be clear. Our sources impartially point out that menopause hormone therapy isn't the right choice for everyone. Due to specific medical histories like cardiovascular risks or certain hormone receptor-positive breast cancers, MHT might not be an option.
Which is exactly why understanding the cellular mechanics of heavy lifting is so critical. Whether you use hormone therapy or your medical history dictates that you don't, high-intensity resistance training is a non-negotiable cornerstone of protecting your skeleton.
So what does this all mean? It completely reframes how you view a workout. You aren't just burning calories, you are actively manipulating the fluid dynamics and the nuclear tethers of billions of cells deep inside your skeleton.
You're taking control of your cellular biology.
Exactly. We've traced the whole pathway. Menopause tilts the scale toward bone loss, but picking up a heavy barbell physically bends the bone, drives that interstitial fluid through microscopic canals, yanks open piezo 1, and forces your body to build new armor.
And maintaining that armor is really about preserving your mobility, your independence, and your wellness as you age. So, speak with your healthcare provider or physical therapist. Ask how you can safely start incorporating deadlifts, squats, or weighted vests into your routine.
Because your osteocytes need that physical force, and it is up to you to provide it. But before we wrap up, this deep dive leaves us with one final, incredibly provocative thought from the biomechanical sources.
Yes, this raises an important question about the future. In that same eLife paper about mice and the piezo 1 channel, researchers found a small molecule agonist.
A synthetic chemical compound.
Right, and this agonist can actually bind to and artificially pull open the piezo 1 channel. When they gave this to adult mice, it basically tricked the osteocytes into thinking they were experiencing massive fluid shear stress.
Even though they weren't exercising at all.
Exactly. It triggered the whole bone-building cascade, increasing bone mass and strength, entirely mimicking the effects of heavy lifting without a single moment of physical exercise.
That is wild. The cell just felt the chemical, translated it as massive physical force, and commanded the builders to get to work. It leaves you wondering, could the future of osteoporosis prevention for people who are, say, paralyzed or just physically unable to exercise be a literal heavy lifting pill?
A pill that tricks your cellular network into believing you just crushed a 200-pound deadlift.
Yeah.
It is a profound possibility that could completely alter the landscape of bone health for millions.
But until that pill actually makes it through clinical trials and onto pharmacy shelves, the demolition crew inside your skeleton is actively on the clock.
That's right.
It is entirely up to you to hand the builders their hard hats. You have to grab a heavy dumbbell, bend some bone, and force that fluid to flow. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into menopausal bone health. We will see you next time.